Firstly, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this morning to hear more about our exciting new competition we are launching. So this is SBRI Healthcare Competition 27, which is all about work-related digital innovations for individuals with poor mental health in partnership with NHS England's Digital Innovation Team. I'm Michelle Leedy. I'm a Senior Programme Manager here at SBRI Healthcare and will be chairing this session. Just before we move on, to say this webinar is being recorded and the recording and the slides will be uploaded to the website after the event. So we have a packed agenda. You've not just got me talking this morning. I'm joined by a couple of other colleagues from SBRI Healthcare talking about the programme and the application process. We've also got Catherine North here, who is Senior Digital Innovation Manager at NHS England, and she'll be talking about the Digital Innovation Team. We've got Dr. James Woolard, who's National Speciality Advisor for Digital Mental Health at NHS England, and also a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist. He'll be talking more about the key challenges we hope to address with this funding competition. And he'll be staying around at least for the first Q&A session. So if you do have any questions for him, please make sure they're in the Q&A box for the first Q&A session. And we've also got Helen Hoyland here, Head of Commercial Innovation and Growth for Health Innovation Yorkshire and Humber, and she'll be going through the support that's offered by the HINs. Right, so as I said, thank you everyone for taking the time to join. It's a great opportunity for you to ask any questions you have about this competition to everyone on the call today. Do ask questions in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll collate these for the Q&A session. To note, we won't be monitoring the chat for questions, so please only ask or raise any technical issues in the chat box. For those of you not familiar with Zoom, the Q&A box should be at the bottom of your screen. If it's not, you may need to click on the three dots by more, and you can access the Q&A box there. As I said, the slides and recording will be uploaded onto the website after this event. And if you do have any other questions, queries for us after this event, then our website is on, our email address is on screen now and will be added at various points during the presentation. Thank you. So I'm now delighted to hand over to my colleague Charmaine Mulligan, another Senior Programme Manager within SBRI Healthcare, who's going to give you a bit of an overview of SBRI Healthcare. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. As Michelle said, I'm Charmaine Mulligan, and I'm going to give you an introduction to the SBRI Healthcare programme today. Next slide, please. So for those of you that are not familiar with the programme, SBRI stands for Small Business Research Initiative. And SBRI Healthcare provides funding and support to early stage projects to enable feasibility testing and product development, as well as to more mature innovation by supporting the implementation or real world evidence generation. The programme is funded by the Accelerated Access Collaborative, which is a partnership of several organisations that work together to streamline the adoption of new innovations into healthcare, and includes, amongst others, the Health Innovation Network and NHS England. And the focus of the projects that we fund are set by the priorities of NHS England and support the NHS long-term plan. And through the funding and support from our networks, the programme's overall aim is to improve patient care and patient outcomes. And this can be achieved through making healthcare more efficient, bringing new innovations into the care pathway, and by making sure that the organisations that are delivering healthcare continue to sustain and contribute to the UK economy. Next slide, please. So SBRI Healthcare is aimed at SMEs, although it is open to other types of organisations. It offers 100% of funding to SMEs to accelerate innovations. And the programme, although it does have a robust process for making funding decisions, it is a risk-oriented programme. So we aim to offer a straightforward application and a quick turnaround. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So since the programme was created, SBRI Healthcare has supported well over 300 innovations and invested over £150 million. And if you go to our website, you can see a lot more details about these innovations and a selection of case studies of projects that have gone through our programme. Here on screen, you can see an overview of the organisations we have funded within our portfolio. See, our portfolio is arranged by themes. So some are settings, some are a clinical area, or some are a key NHS challenge. And within the portfolio, you can see there that the majority is made up of SMEs, with a few universities, NHS trusts, or charities. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the impact that our portfolio has generated so far. As a couple that I'd like to highlight. So one of them there is that over 100 companies are now realising commercial revenues from within our portfolio. And I also mentioned on a previous slide that we've invested over £150 million, and you can see that that's actually led to over 700 million raised in private investment. So these are a couple of ways that the SBRI portfolio is contributing to the UK economy. But what's more important than that is the impact to the millions of people that have been reached either through collaborations or through clinical trials, or as the beneficiaries of health innovations that have been adopted into the healthcare system. And those many millions of people are something we're very proud of. Next slide, please. So on top of the NHS and the Health Innovation Network, we have a growing number of collaborators and partners, and you can see several of them are on the bottom of the slide there. And some are focused specifically in a particular area of health, and others are more specialist expertise. At pre-competition stage, we organise webinars, drop-in sessions, and other things to engage with innovators and help with the application process. So today's event is part of our pre-competition support. And then once applicants have been awarded, they have access to a number of workshops. We call this in-competition support. It varies depending on what the needs of the portfolio are, but you can see some of the things that we've done in the past are things like workshops on IP or the value proposition alongside using the NICE Meta tool. And then support does continue after your project is finished, and we have what we call our in-portfolio support. And this varies, but includes things like networking or showcase events, as well as webinars on some specialised topics such as regulatory or the roadmap to the NHS. And these are things to help unblock barriers to adoption. We also record the impact of our projects through case studies, through our annual survey and through our annual report. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we do work in collaboration with the Health Innovation Network, and you'll hear more about the work that they do and how they support innovators later in this webinar. So I will not steal their thunder at the moment. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So this is not an exhaustive view of the healthcare funding landscape, but it highlights at what stages of the innovation journey SBRI Healthcare offers funding, which is from the point of translation right through to adoption. The competition we're here to talk about today, which is work-related digital innovations for individuals with poor mental health, can include innovations at any point in that innovation journey, so right from early translational stage through to implementation and adoption. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, SBRI runs themed competitions that focus on specific healthcare challenges, which are determined by the priorities of the NHS. And I also mentioned we are particularly suited to SMEs. So other organisations can apply but there needs to be a clear route to commercialisation identified. Organisations can be based anywhere in the UK and the EU, but does need to be a tangible benefit to healthcare in the UK, demonstrated through the project. And for this competition, the funding you can apply for is up to £200,000, and projects need to be completed within 12 months. Next slide, please. So there are several possible outcomes that you might see from your projects, not necessarily all the ones listed here, as it depends on what's relevant to your innovation and where it is in its development. So you can see here included are examples such as feasibility testing or understanding the market, which you might expect if they were outcomes if your innovation is still early in its development. Whereas outcomes such as implementation plans for scale-up would be more relevant if your innovation is at a later stage in its development. So it depends where you are with your innovation. Next slide, please. So today's launch event is to let you know about the work-related digital innovations for individuals with poor mental health competition. And there are 3 sub-challenges within this competition. The first is aimed at people who are in employment and struggling with their mental health, to provide rapid support to help them remain in work. The second sub-challenge, is for individuals struggling with mental health who are unemployed, and it's to support them to either gain employment or return to work. And the third challenge is specifically for people from disadvantaged communities with mental health problems, and that's either to gain work, to remain in work, or to return to work. There is a lot more detail about each of these 3 sub-challenges in the challenge brief document, which is available on our website. So please do read that carefully. You're going to hear more about them as well later in this webinar. And so that gives you a whistle-stop tour of SBRI Healthcare, our portfolio and how the programme works. I'm now going to pass you back to Michelle, who will introduce the next speaker. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Charmaine. Hopefully that was clear to everyone. And now I'd like to move on to the digital innovation team who have supported with this competition. And I'll hand you over to Catherine Knorr, who is the Senior Digital Innovation Manager within the team. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for that introduction. And good morning, everybody, and welcome. First slide, please. You just move it on a bit. That's great. Thank you. So I thought it'd be useful to give some context to the competition and talk a little bit about our team. So the Digital Innovation team sits within the Innovation, Research, Life Sciences and Strategy Department within NHS England. This department works collaboratively with the wider system to transform patient care through innovation and research. And our team is responsible for identifying digital innovations and supporting digital transformation at a system level to drive sustainable improvement. One of our programs includes digital therapeutics, and these are digital health technologies that prevent, manage, or treat a medical condition or disorder. With this program, we have a great opportunity to improve patient outcomes and the economy by targeting innovations around health and work. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So we know that poor health can limit people's ability to remain in work or to find work. And the 2 main reasons for sickness absence are mental health and musculoskeletal conditions. And this particular work stream is for mental health. Evidence shows that depression, bad nerves, or anxiety are highly prevalent in working-aged adults, and recent figures show a sharp rise among younger adults in particular by around 40% between 2019 and 2023, which is worrying. Work is important for our health because good work can improve a person's well-being and prevent social exclusion. And this launch of this competition this week is particularly timely as it is World Mental Health Day this Thursday. And this year's theme is mental health in the workplace. Next slide, please. So the Digital Therapeutics Programme includes a workstream looking to accelerate the adoption of existing digital enabled therapies within the NHS talking therapy services. These aim to free up workforce time so that people can be treated and to improve mental health and employment outcomes. However, this workstream is about driving innovation, and we are looking for new promising innovations which will target work-related challenges faced by people with poor mental health. Innovators could be awarded up to £200,000 and are expected to integrate an evaluation approach to ensure the product is viable and feasible and to demonstrate its effectiveness, value, and applicability for users. So Dr. James Willard will come in next, and he will talk about give you some more information and provide some further context about this competition. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. So I think I've been introduced already, so I won't introduce myself again. If I could have my first slide. So, and we've got a broad audience here. So some of you in the audience may already know some of this, and obviously the mental health and mental ill health have been talked a lot about in the kind of press, and certainly over the last few years, we've seen increasing awareness around mental ill health and managing one's mental health effectively in the kind of public awareness. So, you know, mental health is just like physical health. Everyone has it and we need to take care of it. Good mental health is about thinking and feeling and behaving in ways that helps us live a healthy life. Poor mental health is often where we find ourselves thinking, feeling and behaving in a way that doesn't necessarily support our mental health in that sense. And it can become difficult to cope with those feelings, and sometimes even feel impossible to cope with those. And the way that we think about mental health conditions in psychiatry and in mental health services is we often think about them in terms of diagnoses. So thinking about depression, bipolar disorder, psychosis and anxiety disorders. There are others as well. I think it's worth just reflecting at this stage that, you know, there's different ways of thinking about mental health symptoms, if you like, and the difficulties people have. And like I say, in mental health services, we tend to put those together in these diagnostic criteria that then help us think about what are the effective treatments. So that's just a point to make at the beginning there. Next slide, please. Mental ill health, is rapidly rising. We've seen, you know, you can see in this graph, it's highlighted in terms of depression, anxiety has significantly increased over the last few years. And I think there's, again, it's kind of widely known in the public domain that certainly since the pandemic, mental health difficulties have increased. And often that has been that the experience of that worsening mental ill health has not been universally kind of felt. It's often in our poorest communities, where it says on the slide there, depression rate is twice as high as in the more affluent communities. So this doesn't affect people evenly, and I think that will come on to that as a theme through the slides in terms of thinking about the innovations we want to see in this space, is recognizing that this isn't an even problem for everyone in that sense. So let's move on to my next slide. So there are some, and kind of continuing on that theme, there are inequalities in the experience of mental health and mental illness in that sense. So LGBTQ plus communities have higher rates of mental health difficulties. 80% of adults with autism have at least one mental health condition. People who are deaf have experienced increased mental health difficulties as well. And there are specialist mental health services for people who are deaf as well, and particularly in CAMHS, a good one for CAMHS from St. George's. Black adults are at least the least likely to receive mental health conditions, but actually have higher rates of mental ill health as well. So again, there's a mismatch between need and access there. 85% of older people with depression receive no support from the NHS. So again, access to support is not always as we wish, and then there's an opportunity there. People living with physical and learning disabilities, again, experience poorer mental health and may not access it as readily due to some of the accessibility barriers there. And again, homelessness as well is a key risk factor for mental ill health. So understanding the population, if you like, the different groups that we need to support in this wider context brief of how do we support people with their mental ill health or mental health in the workplace. So let's move on to our next slide. So impact of mental health on work. And I think, Catherine, this is the reason really for this brief, really, which is that we've seen this increase in the number of people who are out of work due to mental health conditions, certainly compared with the pre-pandemic levels. And this, again, hasn't affected everyone equally. We've seen that more in 20 to 34-year-olds, where there's been an increase in or doubling of the kind of work limiting mental health conditions, and then also in that older group, 50 to 64-year-olds, in terms of that work limiting compared with a decade ago. And I think that latter group, you have to understand the kind of rates of mental ill health in that group. There, certainly there's this kind of archetype of the kind of later middle-aged man who's isolated in his community, who doesn't have a good social network, who's lost his job or hasn't been able to get work, doesn't necessarily have the digital skills that he needs to get into kind of different work that's available now. So just building that concept of who are the personas, who are the groups of people that we need to think about, rather than just thinking about a sort of panacea approach to this. So let's move on to our next slide. So what's the importance of work on mental health? And I like to think of it in with these three key elements, and this is kind of linked to psychological well-being. If we have autonomy in our work, if we're able to have enough control over how we manage ourselves, how we organize our work, that can really help with our sense of well-being in the workplace. That sense of mastery, that we have some sense of skill and control, if you like, over how we can do the job and doing it well is also important. And that sense of purpose, that what we're doing has some sense of meaning, either to ourselves or to others, and it gives us that sense of importance to work. And that can, there are some, so beyond that autonomy, mastery and purpose, and we might want to think about how can we innovatively, if you like, support people with that sense of autonomy, mastery and purpose. And again, part of the impact of mental ill health might be that you do not recognize that you actually have more autonomy than you think. You might have more mastery than you think, especially if you kind of got those kind of depressive, negative thoughts. I'm not so good at this, I can't do it. Actually, you might be much better at it than you think you are, as a result of that kind of depressive thinking. Or you might feel that you're not got that purpose. You don't see the purpose of what you're trying to do. So work can support with income, and we can talk at length about how income links to mental health to some extent, with that sense of identity, that social networking. And we certainly heard that from young people who've been working remotely, and they've lost that sense of connection with colleagues in the workplace because everyone's working remotely. And there's been some kind of change around that since we've come back from the pandemic, if you like, back into the office. A steady routine and structure. So that structure, we often talk in kind of cognitive behavioral therapy terms about behavioral activation, which is often about giving people structure in their day to help them kind of become more activated. And it's that link between behavior, thoughts and feelings. If we behave in a slightly different way, it can affect our thoughts and our feelings. And there's an opportunity to gain and contribute and gain skills, as we've talked about. And again, on the converse of that, in terms of the negative impact of work on mental health, obviously, if you're in a workplace that's very stressful, that's got some very difficult interpersonal dynamics in terms of with your colleagues, that can have a significant effect. Doing certain types of work might not give you that sense of autonomy, mastery and purpose. And so kind of it might not feel rewarding in that sense. And mental health and the kind of culture of work around mental health may have an impact on stigma. So you may not feel able to share some of your difficulties with your colleagues in that sense. And I think there's a nice quote there. I was proud of my ability to keep my anxiety hidden from my colleagues and saw it as a sign of strength until the day it became impossible. So I think that's an example of how culture and the stigma around mental health is something else also to think about in the workplace when it comes to that link between work and mental health. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to, again, partly to prompt you, perhaps if this isn't a way that you've thought about developing innovations before, but thinking about that user-centered design approach and thinking about, just think about a persona who's of someone who's struggling with their mental health in the workplace. So we've come up with this, the day in the life of John. So John gets up at 9 o'clock. He struggles with crowds during peak times. He has lots of worries that he has to deal with. And so when he gets to work in the morning, he's feeling quite anxious. He has a meeting with his line manager and he's worried about his performance. Again, that kind of negative thought. Perhaps he isn't quite recognizing how much autonomy and mastery and purpose he has within his workplace. And he doesn't want to kind of share those concerns because he's concerned that he'll appear as weak and lose his job. John has a report that he needs to finish, but he kind of feels overwhelmed by that. And that's often a common experience, not feeling stuck and not being able to take any steps towards finishing a task. He can't focus and he gets worried about asking others for help. He also has carers responsibility. So it's not just about what's going on in his workplace. It's also about what's going on outside. And he has to check in with his parents during his lunch hour, so he doesn't get an opportunity to eat there. So again, just those basics of eating, sleeping well can't be forgotten. So, actually, how do we support people to look after themselves with those basic things as well? He has a meeting with his customer he gets anxious about, and he feels sort of unsafe when he's having this conversation. Doesn't quite feel like he's in control of that conversation. He has these anxious thoughts. Those ruminating thoughts. Should I get a different job? Should I be looking for something else? But then he feels trapped because he needs the money from the job. He doesn't want to take that risk of finding a better job that might suit him and work better with his caring responsibilities. But then he manages to have a quick cup of tea with his colleague, and just through that kind of conversation with a person he's known for a long time in the workplace, he's able to perhaps share some of his concerns, and that just helps him feel calmer and more in control. He tries to concentrate on that report again that he's still trying to finish, and towards the end of the day, when he's under pressure, he's really struggling to get the kind of numerous distractions he's got in the workplace, and he starts to panic and gets a bit irritable with a colleague, and so he goes home again feeling like he's had a tough day at work and is struggling, and he's just got to go home, go to sleep, and get up and do it all over again. So that sense of how, again, over time, this becomes a chronic picture, which kind of gradually gets John into trouble in terms of how he's managing. So how can we support John? What are the innovative ways that we can kind of touch on those pain points across his day and think about how we might address those, both by supporting him, but also maybe supporting those in his workplace as well, in terms of supporting John. So let's move on to my next slide. So looking at the kind of potential of digital as an option for people with poor mental health. So, why are we thinking about digital? Why do we think this could be a good thing? Well, actually, we've got there are some current barriers to support whilst you're in the workplace, and I certainly see this in my work when I work with parents who have jobs and I can't phone them during the work day to talk about their children. That affects their mental health as well, because they can't access the support to support their children. So people in the workplace who juggle numerous responsibilities find accessing face-to-face services difficult and inconvenient. If the NHS is just 9 to 5 and your boss means you have to, and your boss means you wants you to be in the office at 9 to 5, you're going to struggle to access the services and support you need. So the corollary to that is the digital solutions can be available anytime. They can be convenient. If you want to look at them at 8 o'clock at night in terms of those resources online or that digital innovation, then it's there for you when you need it. Waiting times may lead to support not being available. So if you need that support now and you're going to have to wait a few weeks for it, that can be tricky as well. So again, digital solutions can be available at the point of need and address those stresses before they get worse in that sense. Those not in employment or self-employed may not know where to turn for help. So some employers have significant employee support programs, but those who are self-employed or not in employment may not know. So again, through digital routes, we can support people to access those services. We can get them into the right support at the right time. And then again, there's that stigma I've already touched on in my earlier slides. Well, actually, there's opportunities within digital innovations to receive help anonymously and with patient choice, where you're in control of that, of who knows that you're accessing that service, and that can give people that sense of autonomy and control in that sense. So some services may be inaccessible or unsuitable, and there could be a number of reasons. So again, digital has a number of elements to it. Digital innovation could have a number of elements to it that improves accessibility for some of those groups around sort of, if we think about here's a very simple example. The NHS tends to send out letters. Are letters the only way that we can communicate with people? No, we have multi-channel, omni-channel digital communications available in our lives. So we've got to think innovatively about how we can change the way that we interact with people, engage people in mental health care. So let's move to our next slide. We did want to make the link between and again, this is about thinking specifically about this group. This isn't looking for a panacea that's going to help everyone, but maybe thinking about how you might be tailoring an innovation, recognizing the needs of individual groups within this broader population of those who are struggling with their mental health and employment. And we can see the link between education, digital skills, and deprivation as well. So it may well be that the people we're trying to help with these innovations do not have the level of education. They don't have A levels or master in education. So thinking about the content, it needs to be accessible to those with different levels of education. They may not have the money to support the kind of digital access in terms of paying for a 5G contract or having Wi-Fi at home. So again, it might be thinking about how do you work with those community assets where people can access? How do you support digital accessibility in that way through the innovation? And then that point of kind of digital literacy. So they might have a smartphone, they might have access to the internet, but actually perhaps they never developed the digital skills that you need. So again, thinking about what digital skills. Now, there's an interesting tension here, because if perhaps through an intervention we can help support people develop that sense of autonomy and mastery around digital skills, whilst also supporting them with their mental health, that then helps improve their chances of getting back to the workplace, particularly where digital skills nowadays are a key element of employability, if you see what I mean. So let's move on to my next slide. So I think I've got a few minutes left. Sub-challenge 1, we've already touched on this: provide rapid support to individuals to help them remain in work. So think about those work-related risk factors for those within mental health, anxiety associated with workplace. Think about our persona of John, feeling overloaded, faced with multiple work pressures in combination with children, parent response, or caring for your elderly parent responsibilities. There might be others as well. So thinking about that, how can we address those in new effective ways? End users could be both individuals, and I kind of touched on this earlier, employers as well. So thinking about that kind of system approach, not just thinking about the individual, but think about the system that individual exists within. So next slide, please. So again, sub-challenge 2, we've touched on this already, but just kind of reflecting on that in a bit more detail: support individuals return to work or gain employment. So again, I kind of touched on this a little bit about confidence, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. How do we support people to feel like they've got a little bit more mastery around some of the skills they need to get back into the workplace, whilst also supporting them with their mental health? And there's a nice parallel between the mastery that we develop perhaps through a program like cognitive behavioral therapy, in terms of mastery over our feelings and our thoughts and our behavior. So we develop that sense of awareness. Do we develop a sense of the tools, if you like, the techniques that we can use to manage our thoughts and our feelings and our behavior, that then helps us gain some sense of mastery over our mental health, which then might help us get that sense of mastery over our work. Being treated unfairly, experiencing stigma, social issues. So all of these things might be coming up. And again, different populations might be experiencing these differently, as we've kind of touched on in the slide. So reflecting that one size isn't going to fit all, perhaps, for this population. So yeah, and I think that's covered in that kind of what we're asking you to do is kind of think about those different aspects. Next slide, please. So sub-challenge 3, targeting disadvantaged community support individuals to retain and remain work. I mean, I've kind of already started to build on this flavor in terms of theme, in terms of this work. And I think it's then important to kind of drill into this. So I really hope we can inspire innovators out there to really think about populations and their particular needs, and really put the effort in, if you like, at this early stage to understand the needs of those populations, so that we can really support those populations getting into work. I wanted to note, and I think just to kind of highlight that we're talking about employment as an important part of this, but obviously we recognize that going straight into employment may not be for everyone, and it may not be the right thing in terms of their mental health and managing their mental health or recovering from their mental illness. So those the sort of innovations or kind of solutions that look at also that kind of voluntary step, or that kind of what's that step before employed work that helps people get back into work, I think is important as well, just to kind of recognize that meaningful activity is the key perhaps to recovery, whilst employment might be the long-term goal. Let's move on to the next slide. And I think just to kind of highlight some exclusions here. So what are we not looking for? We're not looking for non-digital solutions. I hope that's fairly obvious. We're not looking for things that kind of make more work for people in terms of negatively impacting on staff loads, and that require kind of high upfront capital investments by clinical services. Technology, we're not looking for things that are relevant for use under 16. We're looking for those over 16. And we need solutions that easily integrate within the NHS. So things that are going to be firewalled or siloed, we need to kind of, we're not particularly interested in those siloed solutions. We need to think about the system that we're kind of working in here. Nor do we want to hear, as I hope is abundantly clear from the previous last 10 minutes or so, anything that exacerbates health inequalities and doesn't comply with GDPR policies and is not co-designed with end users. So lots, I mean, that's almost the negative. We've given you what we want to see from you, and here are some of the things that we definitely don't want to see from you in terms of that. Now, in terms of physical health, I suppose, well, not I suppose, there are obviously some physical health links, or there are links between physical health and mental health. We want to see something that primarily addresses mental health, whilst also recognizing that physical health issues or conditions may be related to mental health. So as long as the primary purpose is mental health, that's what we'd like to see. I think you can probably read most of those for yourself, and I think I've run out of time. In fact, I might have gone a few minutes over, so apologies for that. Back to the Q&A, I think.
Thank you very much, James, and hopefully that really brought to
I think Michelle has frozen. So I think maybe we'll move on to the Q&A, and hopefully she will unfreeze and join us again when she's back. So for the moment, I'll ask the questions, and I'm sure Michelle will rejoin when she's got a minute. So the first question is from Lois W. Sorry if I'm pronouncing anybody's name wrong. I am just wondering regarding partnerships, if it is tech innovation, or could we work with an existing provider? Sorry, the question has just moved. It's one of the joys of reading these out. So could we work with an existing provider, someone, for example, employee assistance program first talk therapy like Viva or Care First? What kind of partnerships are you looking for? So I think someone is asking whether they need to create their own or whether they could work with somebody else.
Catherine, I don't know if you want to come in, or I'm happy to kind of share my thoughts.
You can share your thoughts and I'll come in, James, if
Okay.
you...
So I think my view would be, I think that it's looking for something innovative. So if the partnership is about providing, kind of meets that innovation brief, then I'm not sure we'd necessarily say no at this stage. I think we'd want to go through that kind of due diligence process of understanding that as a part of the application process. But I don't want to say no at this stage to that. That's my view. I hope my colleagues on the call agree with that.
Yeah, I agree, James. And just to add to that, so the employee assistance programs, we're not actually looking for those in particular, but it might be that something that they signpost to might be useful. But again, I think it's really important to just flag again that we are looking for it to target particularly people with mental health, and it has to have a work-related solution as well. So just to flag that, but yeah, we wouldn't say no at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So the next question is from Guy Robertson. Can you provide a bit more context on the term innovation, and if this also includes integration of technology to build a solution? It's a very broad question.
Charmaine, just read that back through me again. I don't know if I quite captured this. Apologies to the audience.
Can you provide a bit more context on the term innovation?
Okay.
And if it also includes integration of technology to build a solution?
Okay, so I mean, there are various definitions of innovation in that sense. I think if it's an existing piece of technology that is used in another area that you are thinking about using in a new space, the kind of work mental health related space, then I would consider that innovation. If it's a completely new concept, a new idea, new use of or new technology entirely, then obviously that would definitely meet that kind of criteria for innovation. I'm not sure I quite understand the bit around technology integration. I don't think it would be I don't know if I've quite understood the question in that sense, but let me just think. This is one answer to that question, which is, we're not looking for a USB cable that connects up existing technologies to then somehow change the system. I don't think we're looking for that kind of integration as an innovative solution to some of the issues. I think we're looking for something slightly more innovative than that in that sense. But we do want it to integrate, or at least anticipate integration within the existing system. So there is definitely some homework around understanding, for example, how the NHS connects with innovators or innovative applications at the moment.
Sure. So Emma had her hand up. I didn't know whether she wanted to come in.
Thanks, Charmaine. No, I just wanted to, firstly, just quickly introduce myself. I'm a digital innovation lead within the digital innovation team. I think actually James covered off the answer very well. So in relation to whether we would support applications to, I guess, integrate or update back-end technology that would then allow the build of a new technology. I think what we would want to see is very clear about what that service user facing technology or product would be. So we wouldn't be supporting just sort of general back-end updates, but we would want to have a clear view to how or what product was being developed through that process.
Thanks, Emma. And I can see Michelle has rejoined us.
Apologies about that. My internet decided to stop working. So thank you, Charmaine, for jumping
No
on.
problem.
I'm hotspotting from my phone, so hopefully we won't have any further issues. I'm not entirely sure where you got up to, but should we start with this question? Are projects that work directly with employers in scope? I.e., we would like to work directly with police and paramedic groups who have a high number of employees that are missing work due to mental illness, and also our partnerships with universities in scope. So I think there's two separate questions there, but if I could hand over to James, I think you touched on this briefly during your presentation.
Well, I think this is really interesting in terms of, I think for something to be effective, and to, or at least have the chance of being effective, it has to understand a population that it's working with. So I think there's definitely working with employers of particular groups that you may want to target, I think is a must in terms of understanding the user needs of those groups. I maybe look to my colleagues Emma and Catherine around the technicality of a partnership. And again, I think it goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of at this stage, wouldn't necessarily, I don't think I would want to say no, because we're keen to kind of see those innovative partnerships potentially, as well as the innovation that comes from those innovative partnerships. So I think it picks up on another point that I saw in the questions about targeting individual industries with lawyers, factory workers, healthcare professionals. So absolutely, in terms of how do we, and particularly thinking strategically about those groups in the economic sense. So if there's a group who are significantly impacted by mental ill health in the workplace, and they have a strategic economic kind of impact on the country, so healthcare workers would be an example of that, but I guess we don't want to see 100 innovations to help doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals get better. There are other industries out there that are important. So I think understanding the populations you're trying to help, and giving us that kind of link between these are their needs and this is why we want to do that is really important. Emma, did you want to come in?
I think you've again covered it very well on the partnerships with employers side of things. Just to answer the second question about partnerships with universities, yes, those would be supported. We're particularly interested in sort of robust methods of evaluation and evidence generation. So yes, if you want to include a university partner to play that role, then yes, for sure, that is supported.
Thank you both. Next question. Are you looking primarily for CBT interventions, or would you consider more integrative techniques, including humanistic interventions? I'll start with James again. Yeah,
sure. So I think, again, I think it's about the existing evidence base, and there are other therapies are available with an evidence base than just CBT. So I think we want to have a look at that. I think obviously people may not agree with this, but CBT tends to be talked about as if it's got the strongest evidence base, and it's a commonly used intervention within sort of talking therapies, which is that primary care kind of first point of access, often for people with mental health conditions. So but within the talking therapy space, there are other therapies used as well. So again, I think it's about being able to demonstrate to us that the innovation builds on an evidence base for an effective intervention. So that would be a key part of the application, I would say.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, James. And I think the only thing I'd add to that is, just to remember there's got to be that link back to employment or getting people back into work.
And on that, we've got a specific question here. Is an ADHD app targeted towards working parents of children with ADHD in scope?
So that's interesting. I think parental stress obviously has an impact. Sorry, ADHD has an impact on ADHD in a child can have an impact on parental stress, which then can have an impact. So I wouldn't necessarily consider, in terms of the remit of this competition, the ADHD app that supports the child's ADHD directly. What I would be wanting to see is the link between how, in the context of somebody with caring responsibilities, and there are other childhood conditions, and I say, like, older parents, how that sort of parental stress, if you like, or carer stress, is then managed in terms of employment and workplace. So I guess it's just that it's not, a treatment of a child with ADHD is not in scope from what I can see in the terms and conditions of this. What is in scope is thinking about that parent, their carer stress, and how we support them in the workplace. I don't know. I hope my other colleagues in NHS England agree with that.
Yeah,
there's nodding around.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there's a question on, I don't know if this was the one you're alluding to earlier. Is there any scope to apply with technology to support frontline mental health and social care professionals rather than online digital health tools?
So say that one again for me, Michelle. I didn't quite capture the link there between social. I was missing the sort of subtlety in that question, I think.
So they're looking for technology to support the frontline mental health and social care professionals.
Yeah.
And they say rather than online digital health tools.
I mean, I think the digital element of this is important. Again, I might be misunderstanding the question, so forgive me if I am. I don't think we're looking for things to help me do my job better as a psychiatrist working in the front line. I think what we're looking for is those things that support people who have mental health difficulties in the context of their employability or employment. And so if that person happens to be a social worker, again, see my previous answer, social worker or a healthcare professional, so be it, in terms of you're recognizing the needs of those individual populations. So I think that's probably the answer to that question. Yeah,
I agree with you there. If it's supporting the mental health of those frontline mental health and social care professionals, yeah, fine. If it's just supporting them, then someone's just added to that, so linked to that question, would technology for employment support practitioners, e.g. careers officers, etc., apply?
So again, I think go back to the end user. It's an interesting thing, because I talked about the fact that the end user is the person with the mental health difficulties and their job and their work and their meaningful activity in that sense. So I think I wouldn't want to see, for example, a scheduling app for people who are working in kind of those supportive roles around that person. I'd want to see something that could, if it's used by the person who has those mental health difficulties, in supporting their interaction with others who are going to help them get back to work or get into work, that I think is probably more in scope. So again, it's perhaps a subtle difference, but it's about who's the primary user, I suppose, is my question. I hope, Catherine, Emma, you kind of agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that, James.
Good. Okay.
So
there's some subtlety here, which is, I'm glad these questions are picking out. So thank you.
So we're saying it's not eligible with mental health concerns get back into work or remain in work. It's got to be directly for the individuals themselves.
Mm.
And does that fit in with the workplace employer environment as well? I think that was...
Well, I think that's where there's a slightly grey area, I have to admit, which is, it's about, I suppose what I would, in broad terms, it needs to be relational, right? In that sense. So if we think about an employer, if we think about a manager in a workplace environment, how can it support in a relational way how they're supporting the person who might have mental health difficulties in their team, right? So it might, you know, it might be something that they share together. And I don't want to get into solutions right now, but something that supports that relationship could be really important in terms of that. So I think we have, you know, I think the gray area is then the kind of agencies that work outside of the outside of that employment space, you know, particularly in the context of people getting back to work. So, Anne, I don't know if you want to come in there.
Yeah, James, sorry, I think I completely agree with what you said. We all appreciate that the employment ecosystem is one that is diverse. So the, you know, an employee, as we're focused on this intervention, this digital innovation could be focused on that individual, but it also could, as James has said, could also work with or target, say, a manager, for example, a line manager. So that is important. So it's not just necessarily the individual, it could be a peer-to-peer. But again, we can't define everything. So we are hoping that innovators actually consider the innovation that you have either developed or are developing or would like to develop, that you would again look to the brief and what we are sharing as part of this launch event to help you make your decisions and for whether that's for you to proceed or not.
Thank you. And the challenge brief is up on my website, so we definitely recommend everyone take a good look at that before applying. Next question about, can you expand on the point about projects must easily integrate with the NHS? Can you provide a description about what this looks like, what would or wouldn't work?
So I think this fits with the you know, kind of meeting the standards of digital technology that the NHS has set out, right? So it's not necessarily so. You know, if we think about API, so you know, the bits of software that allow bits of technology to talk to each other, building those in from the beginning would be a helpful thing to think about. Like just understanding what do I need to build into my product in order to be able to connect into those services, so that if we want to switch, if the NHS wants to switch it on or wants to work with you to switch that on, we can. What we don't want to see is something from a technical point of view that doesn't anticipate that future, right? If you've built a nice firewalled kind of piece of technology that doesn't have the required kind of standardized ways of creating APIs, and I don't want to get into the detail of that right here, you know, then, you know, that's going to build in cost in the future for the NHS. Because if we love your product, but you've made it very difficult for us to integrate into the NHS is then going to have to do that retrospective engineering with you to kind of make it work. So we want to avoid that kind of technical debt at all costs, if possible.
Yeah, and
Emma,
just
did you want to? Oh, Catherine and Emma. Sorry, Catherine. Go to you.
Sorry. Emma, do you want to go first? Sorry, I didn't put my hand up. You go first.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, I guess I just wanted to expand on what James was saying. So if it does depend on what you anticipate to be the adoption strategy for your product. So if you are thinking that your product would be referred to, or people who would use the product would be referred to via employment advisors in talking therapy services, for example, that product should interact with electronic patient medical records so that the outcomes could be linked in that way. On the other hand, we've been talking about products that could be supplied to people through employers. And so if that's the case, then you should be thinking about how your product would integrate with sort of employer systems. Or I think there is a question about could partnerships be with employment assistance programs, and so that kind of partnership would enable the adoption of products as well. So yes, it very much depends on what you anticipate the adoption route of your product to be.
sorry, Michelle, if I can just sort of kind of add to that. I think it's about building the possibility that the patient themselves might want to share information with the NHS at some point, right? If you built a thing where they've, you know, spent 6 months collecting data, for want of a better word, on their mental health, and they might get to a point where they want to share that with a therapist, or that share that with the NHS in some way. If they have to then print all that information out and come to an appointment with a therapist and here plonk this pile of paper on the floor, on the desk, and say, here's what I've been working on for the last 6 months, I don't think that's a great digital solution. So I think it's, again, just thinking about those handoffs, right? How can the user manage that information that they've, you know, spent 6 months generating in their use of your innovation, that in terms of then helping them take that next step if they need further help, or if they have an interaction with the NHS. So again, it's just about not building in that kind of technical limitation at the beginning.
Thanks, James. And I just wanted to add, just for people to have a look at the additional guidance, it does refer to the DTAC standards, so that's Digital Technology Assessment Criteria, and there is a requirement in there for interoperability, so it will give you a lot more information if needed. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think it's also a key point to remember this should be considered from the very beginning to ensure, as everyone said, this is developed in a way that will interact, rather than that being retrofit. So, next question, a bit of a different note. Would you say menopause-related interventions that help address mental health challenges as symptoms is within scope?
So I don't know, again, my immediate reaction is probably yes, particularly if it focuses on, you know, supporting women who are going through the menopause with, you know, with their mental health in the workplace. I mean, I want to say yes to that question, and that's the answer, right? I definitely don't want to exclude that group from this competition.
Yeah, I agree, James. And I think, again, it's just as long as it's covering, you know, the mental health aspect of that, and also, you know, getting people back to work or remain in work or whatever it is, then yeah, that's fine.
As with all of them, do ensure you consult the challenge brief and tailor your application to the scope. Thank you. Another question on remit. Would online modules made to support employees with depression or trauma, but would be used alongside typical therapy to enhance or consolidate learning, be allowed, or would they need to be effective on their own? And I think this is touching at one of the exclusion criteria within the presentation about potentially talking therapy interventions. So does it need to stand alone, or can it support?
I think my immediate response, Michelle, was going to be if it's innovative, right? And I think you've got to be very clear about what's innovative about your approach, because that there are products out there already that have, you know, done that, and with some, I don't know if success is the right word, but some impact, let's put it like that. So I think we'd have to be really clear on what's different, what's innovative about your approach in that context. And what do you, and I suppose recognizing the challenges and barriers and difficulties that people who have walked in that space before have come across and have had to face, so that you're kind of showing that impact, you know, showing that learning, if you like. What I don't want to see, I suppose, is stuff that we've done before that hasn't worked or hasn't got the traction. You know, let's try and push ourselves to be innovative in this space.
Thank you. Next one. Would identifying mental illness at home due to fuel poverty, change of habits at home that indicate anxiety that impacts on their work be in scope?
So at this stage, I wouldn't want to say no, because that's a really interesting kind of kind of thinking about understanding the, people's needs and what are the barriers. And I guess I want to understand, how are we using digital for that group of people to support them with their mental health in the context of getting back into work or being, staying in work in that sense. So I'm not going to say no. I'm intrigued in terms of wanting to understand that a little bit more. Yeah, that's probably where I'm at with it. I don't know if Catherine or Emma want to say anything particularly more helpful.
No.
Oh, sorry, Catherine. Do you want to go?
No, go on.
I was just going to say, if the technology is really targeted at sort of enabling increased diagnosis of certain conditions, but doesn't really have that clear link to supporting those people who have those mental health conditions to get back into work or stay in work, then I think it would be out of scope. But like James says, we're keen to hear about innovative products and ideas. So if you are able to make that direct link, then we would like to see it.
So another one, do take a look at the challenge brief and ensure your application is tailored to address it. Thank you. So we're slowly running out of time for this Q&A session. So I'll just propose a couple more and then we'll further our presentations and come back to questions at the end. So the next one, would this include digital support to stay in work for those with severe mental illness as well as mild to moderate?
I'm Catherine and Emma. I don't necessarily want to say no, but I'm trying to remember if there's a specific exclusion around that. Off the top of my head, my mind's gone blank about whether there's a specific exclusion about that. I don't think there is.
No, there isn't. It's all mental health conditions that it's included. Haven't excluded any. So yeah.
And again, I suppose just reflecting, I think that's an innovative space to think about. I don't think people have tended to address that space because it's possibly in the too hard to think about box. And if you're prepared to do the too hard thinking, we're prepared to hear your thinking in that sense. Love to hear your thinking, in fact.
Right. Last couple of questions before we move on. Is an eating disorder app based on CBT for those in workplaces in scope, especially for those still at work with sub-threshold symptoms that wouldn't meet criteria to receive NHS treatment?
I think that's a very similar question to the last question. And I think the answer is probably yes to that. In that we haven't excluded eating disorders from them. It's eating disorders are a significant mental health difficulty, and I can imagine they impact on someone's experience of work. And again, it's about that context of how are you making that link between the intervention for eating disorders and managing the impact of that eating disorder in the workplace, I think is probably what I would just draw that nuance through.
Yeah, I'd agree, James. It's just that linkage, isn't it, that really needs to be clear.
Thank you. Right, well, thank you for all the questions. I can see there are numbers still on there. We'll hope to address them in our second Q&A session. But for now, thank you to our panelists. If I can ask you to turn your screens off, and if Charmaine, perfect, due to my technical issues, able to share the screen. And we will hand over to Helen Hoyland, Head of Commercial Innovation and Growth at Health Innovation Yorkshire and Humber. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So I'm from Health Innovation Network Yorkshire and Humber. As a network across England, we're really proud supporters and partners of the SBRI programme, and we're really excited about this particular competition. As you've heard, the ethos is all around supporting people into and to remain in meaningful work. which will therefore enable better health in the long run, support productivity and economic growth, which is, those two things are essentially our core missions here at the Health Innovation Network. So we're really pleased to be here today. Thank you. Can I ask for the next slide, please? So I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of how we can help here at the Health Innovation Network. The key message, the takeaway message really is to reach out either to myself or to your local Health Innovation Network. We'll be really pleased to have a conversation with you about your application. And further details are available obviously via, each HIN has their own website, or you can do a quick Google, or you can find my email address at the end of this. Thank you. Next slide, please. So there's 15 of us across the country. So wherever you live, you should have a Health Innovation Network not too far away. So please have a look on that map. And all of those HINs will be pleased to have a conversation with you and support you and help you to think through your potential application to this particular competition. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we do, Health Innovation Networks, we work to support health and care teams to adopt innovations that will benefit patients. And we also obviously work with innovators, commercial teams, SMEs, large-scale industry, and bring those two sort of worlds together really to improve patient outcomes. Next slide, please. Again, that's really our core role. I'm not going to repeat that verbatim, but that's our core missions of what we do as a network. Next slide, please. And we support innovators right through the innovation pathway, which is complicated, and it depends where you are in your journey as an innovator and how evolved you are. But we all have a commercial team who will support innovators and entrepreneurs with their product, their idea, looking at things like market awareness, access to finance and grant funding, support with SBRI, which is obviously front and center in that diagram, and then working through things longer term around adoption and scale and spread as well. Next slide, please. We've come up with this diagram, which is really sort of more focused on general health tech. I haven't got time to go through all of it today, but the 7 conditions of success for innovation adoption within health and care. And I'd just like you to have a quick sort of read of those and a reflect. And again, it's these sorts of things that we can really help you with if you want to reach out to us. I haven't got time to go through all of them today, but I think I'd just like to draw out a couple of things which sort of resonate with us around SBRI in particular. So think about the pathway, you know, the existing pathway, or what a future pathway might need to look like, not just your product, but where that product sort of sits within the wider system. And take time to understand the pathway that your solution might work in technically and culturally, and explore the reality for the people and organisations involved in the delivery chain. And developed an informed game plan, as we call it. And if you think about this in the context of your proposal, draw together trusted experts with practical experience across different tiers of the delivery system to help build collective understanding and address individual blind spots. So this should be collaborative, and it's something that it's really important to think about in the context of your SBRI application. Also, you know, to think about implementation in the longer term. So think about your clinical champions, all of the teams or the different stakeholders who might be involved in the successful adoption of this innovation in the longer term. And also think about how you can celebrate success to date and really tell a strong, impactful story around what's your sort of vision, what do you think your anticipated benefits are, and how the wider system can benefit from your ideas. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how can we help? So broadly speaking, as I say, we support innovators with various different aspects of their journey. We help to understand unmet needs. So we work with our ICBs and our NHS partners very closely. So we have a good, almost real-time understanding of what their current needs and challenges are and how innovation can help solve some of those issues. We can help with market analysis and due diligence of innovation. We can support with real-world evaluation and the implementation of new technologies and novel ideas. And we share best practice on innovation across England and between ourselves. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in particular for this competition, we could support you with intelligence, as I mentioned, around local and regional healthcare priorities, market awareness of emerging innovations, what's currently out there, what some of your competitors might look like, stakeholder engagement with regional experts to ensure that innovations align with key needs. We can help with the product review and your product development, including evidence generation and things like regulations, things like you've heard today about DTAC and other things associated with the adoption of digital technology in particular. And longer term, we can help you with the review of your commercialization plans or your business model and your value proposition. Next slide, please. We can support with the review of spread and scale approach, implementation, feasibility, and understanding some of the barriers and levers to the adoption of this particular technology. We can support or give advice around high-level health economic evaluation, which is really crucial in terms of evidence generation. We can support with sort of procurement challenges or questions around how might you actually in the longer term sell your product, or who might be some of the payers and the buyers, and how might that work, those sorts of things really. So very practical things. Next slide, please. So that's our offer really. We can support with your application, we can give advice, we can, again, it depends on capacity and you'd have to approach your individual HIN, but there's an offer there around supporting a review of your application potentially. We have lots of intelligence around sort of the market analysis and your competitor awareness and project management support. So how could you realize what you want to achieve in a coherent sort of project, and looking at the different work streams associated with your application. Advice on, really importantly, patient and public engagement and co-production and involving end users in the design of your innovation and the testing and the spread of your innovation, and to think about sort of measurement really, so benefits, impacts and outcomes. I think that's my last slide. Yes. So thanks for listening. Please do reach out. As I say, I'm from Health Innovation Yorkshire and Humber, but there are 14 others across England, and we'd be really pleased to have a conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That was great. And I'll just now hand over to our final presentation of the morning before we get back into the Q&A session, and this will be presented by my colleague Rebecca Stevens, Senior Programme Manager at SBRI Healthcare. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to talk you through just a bit about the application and assessment process for this competition. Next slide, please. So here's a schematic of the competition life cycle. So the process starts with the scoping work to identify areas of need within NHS care provision. So we do this by consulting key strategy papers, so including the NHS long-term plan, speaking to key opinion leaders in the NHS industry and academia, as well as our colleagues from the Health Innovation Network. And once the challenge brief has been drafted and the competition is launched, applicants are invited to apply online. The application consists of an online form supported by a 3-minute video pitch. And then applications will be assessed by a pool of clinical, implementation, technical and commercial experts. And this assessment will take place through November and December. Applications will then be ranked based on their average scores, and the highest scoring applications will be awarded funding. So funding decisions are then ratified by NHS England, and we have quite a quick due diligence and contracting process, and projects are then expected to start in February 2025. So projects for this competition are worth a maximum of £200,000 with a maximum duration of 12 months. Next slide, please. And applications will be assessed based on the following assessment criteria. So firstly, how well does the application address the challenge brief? And does the proposed solution benefit patients, the NHS and/or social care sector and the wider market? And that's worth 20% of the overall score. So that's the highest weighting from all the criteria. Secondly, are the project plan, deliverables and risk mitigation strategy appropriate? And that's worth 15% of the overall score. Is the product innovative? Will it have a competitive advantage over existing and alternative solutions? And are there arrangements surrounding the use and development of intellectual property appropriate? And again, that's worth 15%. Does the proposed project have appropriate commercialization and implementation plans? And that's worth 15%. And obviously bear in mind with these assessment criteria, given that applications are open to innovations right from early stage up to implementation, this will be considered, these plans should be appropriate to the level of development, and we would expect even early stage projects to start thinking about commercialization and implementation plans. So on to the fifth criterion, does the proposed innovation have potential to enhance equity of access? And does the project include consideration towards patient and public involvement? That's worth 10% of the overall score. Does the proposed technology have potential to contribute to net zero emission? And that's worth 5%. And this feeds into the NHS's key targets on net zero, which you can find more information about both on our website and on theirs. Do the host organisation and project team appear to have the right skills and experience to deliver the project? And that's worth 15% of the score. And finally, are the costs justified and appropriate? And that's worth 5%. And so reviewers will assess both the application form and the video pitch based on these 8 criteria, and they will score them from 1 to 5. Those scores will then be multiplied by the weighting, and that will give you the total score for the application. Next slide, please. So here we've got getting into the how to apply, and these are the sort of key dates you need to be aware of. So the competition will launch tomorrow, so the 9th of October, and it closes at 1 p.m. on the 13th of November. As I mentioned before, the assessment period will go right through into December, with contracts being awarded in February next year. Next slide, please. So you can start your application by going to our website, so sbrihealthcare.co.uk. And if you select open competitions, you'll then see details of competition 27. So you can click read more, and next slide, please. And you'll be taken to a page that looks like this. So to point out a few of the key bits of information, we've got a competition timeline on that page. There's some information on the competition, including links to the guidance for applicant document and frequently asked questions. And we've also got a document store at the bottom where you'll find the invitation to tender, the challenge brief, a template application form. So as I mentioned, applications will be completed through our online portal, so just use that template for reference only. A finance form, and also a template development agreement, which is the sort of contract that successful applicants will sign eventually. And in the top right corner of the page, you'll see there's a link to the application portal login. So when you're ready to apply, you can click on that link. So if you go to the next page, please. And it will take you to the landing page for the RMS, so Research Management System portal, where you can register as a new user. And just to note, it does take a few days for accounts to be approved. I think we say at least a couple of working days. So please make sure that you and any members of your project team register for accounts as soon as you know you're wanting to apply, and at least 7 days before the application deadline, so that we can ensure that you're all on the system. Next slide, please. So once you create an account, you'll be able to update your details in the Manage My Details section, and you'll then see opportunities to apply for funding under new grant application. And so if you click on that, next slide, please, That'll take you to a page showing you all the open funding rounds. You can then select to apply for competition 27. Next slide, please. And you've now started an application. You'll see there's some general guidance, and there's also links again to that applicant guidance document I mentioned. Please do have a really good read of both the challenge brief and the applicant guidance before you apply. There's challenge brief essential and applicant guidance, there'll be really useful information and answers to your questions. And you can see all the sections of the application form on the left-hand menu tab, and you can go through and save as you go. Next slide, please. So here, as I mentioned before, all of your sort of co-applicants and project partners will also need to be invited to take part on your application. And so they'll need to have an account on the RMS as well. And when you invite them from the application, when they log in to their RMS account and they click on My Co-applications, as you can see here, any applications where they've been invited as a co-applicant will pop up, and you can see under confirmed that their participation has not yet been confirmed here. So what they'll need to do is click on the icon that's highlighted on the right there to show you more information. Next slide, please. And they'll have an option to either confirm or reject their participation as part of the application. And you need to make sure that all team members confirm their participation before the deadline. And this is often a stumbling block for quite a few applicants. So please make sure that you're on top of this process and in contact with your project partners to ensure that you can submit on time. Next slide, please. And that's the end of the how to apply. And if you've got any questions about that, as I said, there are a lot of useful answers already in the FAQ document and the applicant guidance. So please do have a look at those.
Wow, thank you, Rebecca. And as I've mentioned previously, the slides will be available on the website. So when you do actually come to submitting your application, you can take a look at the guidance there or in the guidance for applicants to help you through that process. So we've got about half an hour left to answer questions. So if I can invite panelists to again show their screens. And I'll just start with a few for James. I believe he's still able to stay on, so some from the last meeting before we get on to the more sort of technical application questions, plus a couple for Helen at the Hin as well. So there was a question, James, about the role of employers in creating conditions of mental ill health. Rather than focus only on the employee and their resilience or autonomy and mastery of those conditions. Is there scope for innovations to push mental ill health support and responsibility onto employers, not employees?
I think we put in the brief that, you know, supporting employers to support employees is definitely in scope. And I think it's that question of innovation, right? If you're trying to do something that somebody else has already done, you know, we need a narrative about why what's different about your approach in that sense. So and again, I would go back to my reflection about the relational element there, in terms of and again, an employer, a manager, a senior manager is an employee themselves who probably has their own mental health difficulties. And just how much, if I'm, you know, with all due respect, if I'm, you know, to my colleagues, if I'm having a bad day as a manager, you know, how much do I need to reflect on how much that impacts on me? So I think, you know, again, it's thinking systematically or systemically I should say systemically, think about systemic therapy in that sense. So systemically about how people are interacting in the workplace. I mean, I absolutely accept that, you know, if you work in a workplace that has a leaky ceiling and the heating isn't switched on and it's mid-October, you know, and you're freezing in work, some of that stuff isn't going to be fixed by an app, right, or a virtual reality headset. So if you've got structural issues in your employment environment, you know, we've got to recognize there are limitations here, and we can't address those.
Thank you. Another question, talking about the link to lifestyle factors. So they say that 80% of preventable mental health issues stem from lifestyle factors. So mentioned in the exclusion criteria, we don't want things that are just looking at physical health, fitness, nutrition, sleep, but it's the intersectionality of all these issues, holistic lifestyle interventions that really matter. And it's hard to separate physical and mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with that in terms of that it is hard to separate. And if we think, I gave the example of behavioral activation, so as a therapeutic intervention within the kind of cognitive behavioral therapy framework of treatment. Now, behavioral activation could be about getting, you know, scheduling into somebody's time that they walk to work if they are able to, because actually that physical activity of walking to work, if that's, you know, practical and possible, you know, actually helps them manage their mental health before the day. So yes, I think again, it's about the lens with which we're focusing on those physical lifestyle factors. Obviously, sleep, eating, exercise, or physical activity, as I prefer to call it, all have an impact on mental health, and often they go not go wrong, but they start to become more difficult to do, both mentally initially, but also perhaps physically in that sense over time. So I definitely think that needs to be addressed, but it's the lens with which you address those issues. What's the framework? What's the behavior change mechanism that you're considering as a part of pulling those things together? I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. And I'd just like to give James a bit of a break now and move over to Helen. So we had a few questions come in from people based around the devolved administrations. So in terms of support from Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, are they able to contact health innovation networks, and how do they best go about it?
Yes, they are. We will be absolutely pleased to speak to anybody who might need some advice or conversation. So I didn't mean to be exclusive there. Obviously, the hidden networks are sort of, you know, commissioned by NHS England to work within the footprint of England. However, we're absolutely happy to talk to innovators from outside our own geography and the wider geography. So please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Perfect. Thank you. And over to Rebecca for a question. So there's a question about entry point. So is the minimum viable product already made a key must, or can applicants be in the process of developing one?
That, Michelle. Yeah, so to clarify, there's no set entry point for this competition. So yeah, by all means, it's not necessary to have a minimum viable product already developed. What I would say is that while sort of proof of concept isn't strictly required, obviously the more successful applications are going to be those with some data to support a case for further development. But yeah, there's no sort of defined technology readiness level that you need to meet in order to apply.
Thank you. And following on from that, there's concern about sharing IP around the technology if they've not protected it yet. Are you able to address their concerns?
So obviously all applications will be reviewed confidentially if there's any sort of concerns around that, and any awarded applications will retain their IP ownership.
Thank you. Another question for you, Rebecca. It comes from an SME who's had 2 separate organisations approach them who want to trial their platform. The different organisations have 2 very different aims in supporting work-related mental health issues. Are they allowed to be co-applicants on 2 applications?
So yes, you can be a co-applicant on more than one application. And similarly, in order to cover off that question as well, if you have a technology or a setting and you want to apply with sort of 2 innovations from the same company, that's also permitted, but you do need to consider the resources allocated to each project and whether you would be able to support both of those projects if they were both to be awarded. And similarly, we wouldn't, they would need to be 2 clearly defined areas with, as you say, like very different aims and objectives. We don't want any double funding across the programme.
Perfect, thank you. And this question could go to any of you, I guess. I don't know if James is still here, or I can see Rebecca on my screen, Emma on my screen. Would repurposing an existing technology to support with work-related mental health class as an innovative? Anyone want to jump in with that one?
I think that's a very tough question to ask. Kind of, on a kind of generic individual. I can't say it won't, but it depends. I suppose would be my kind of unhelpful answer. Again, I would be thinking about specific populations, addressing specific user need, groups, specific sort of user needs of particular groups, and particularly if that group has a particular strategic economic kind of impact, at the moment. So I think what I would want to see is that you have considered the lessons of the failure that it quote unquote that might have happened before, right? Because again, we don't want to be paying for things to have another go in a different segment in the same way, right? So this is innovation the innovation needs to be sort of layered in that sense, right? There's innovation in the technology, there's innovation in the implementation, there's innovation in the change process that supports the implementation of that technology, there's innovation in the therapeutic model, if you want to have a look at that in terms of, but reflecting on the evidence base for that. So unhelpful answer perhaps, but it depends is perhaps the summary of my waffle there, so apologies, Michelle.
And I think in terms of eligibility, we're open to technologies to be repurposed, but it is that case of read the challenge brief, make sure you address the challenge brief and outline the impact it would have within that. Thank you. So I guess that's similar to another question. They already have a digital solution for accessible learning that's market tested and proven. They're now starting to work with NHS trusts in this space to expand into providing mental health support, both for employers and individuals. They need to work with specialists and experts within the NHS to create the content, to aid identifying individuals and their specific issues and the pathways to receive the right support. Is this feasible? And I presume they mean they're eligible for the competition as well.
Based on that short description, it could be, and again I go back to my previous answer, which is about like the layers of innovation that are built within that, in terms of thinking about the range of digital technologies that you might be using, and is there a way of using a different form of technology that that builds out. For example, you might have used an app and now you want to move into virtual reality, or the other way around, or you might want to use a combination of those 2 things, and you might want to think about you know, how you're delivering it in that sense. So I think, again, if you can make a case for the innovation element of it, I think, you know, we'll look at it. That's my view. And anybody, Emma or colleagues, I hope, anything else to add to my answer?
Well, just my immediate reaction was yes, that would definitely be in scope. So the application of an existing technology, but specifically for people with mental health conditions and involving staff from the NHS to make sure that that was applicable and usable by both the end users and the staff within the NHS. Yeah, it sounds right on scope. So yeah, I think
and if I can just add again, I go back to this, the parallels between learning how to manage your mental health, a set of skills, habits, behaviors, however you want to frame it, and that, you know, you develop that sense of mastery, that sense of autonomy, that sense of purpose around managing your mental health. And how does that then impact on your employability, your sense of work, and how to engage with work? So I think there's some interesting dynamics there to explore in terms of, you know, does 1 + 1 equal more than 2 in that sense? Do we get better value if we really understand that kind of full learning process, to use that word in the last question?
Thank you. And there's now another question. I think it's clarifying what you're after and the exclusion criteria. There are a couple of questions about therapeutics, medical technologies, medications. Can you clarify? I don't know if it's also taking that line on the general mental health improvement technologies that are ineligible, but is anyone able to provide just a clear answer in terms of are medications excluded? And what it is you're looking for in terms of medical technologies?
I would struggle to see how medicines themselves could be included directly, as then they don't tend to be digital. I mean, I'm aware of technologies that relate to medication monitoring and medication concordance, and managing one's medication as a part of managing one's mental health if one is prescribed medication. So I suppose, again, you know, I think it would be sort of looking at that element of it, like how do we use digital technologies to help somebody manage their medication related to their mental health, and how does that then impact on their employment and employability in that sense. So I'm sort of, unless there's something very innovative there that I can't actually think about, which, nanotechnology using, nanotechnology drug delivery systems, I think is probably out of scope. And I'd be impressed if you managed to deliver that for the amount of money that we're kind of got on offer, as it were. I think in terms of, I would look at the MHRA guidance around medical devices and be really, really, really clear about that, and go through their flowchart and anticipate, whether you're building a medical device. Software is a medical device, and there's lots of guidance online from the MHRA around software as a medical device. And I think the flowchart is pretty clear in terms of helping you guide through that. And again, I don't think we're necessarily excluding those that might qualify as medical devices. I think what we want to see is that you've understood that you're likely to end up as a class 2 medical device, and therefore you kind of need to work towards that hoop that you will need to jump through in terms of evidence generation and sign off.
Thank you. And another one for you. Can the application or technology be focused on a specific group of the workforce? And in this example, they use young people, 16 to 24-year-olds.
Well, I think I said in the slides that 16 plus is our kind of age group that we're looking at, and I think I've also recognized that young people, particularly, I think in my slide it was 20 to 34-year-olds, are a group that have been significantly impacted by mental ill health and difficulties in employment over the last few years. So I would say yes in the answer to that. I'd want to understand that there has been some research or discovery around the particular needs of young people, and thinking about their I don't want to typecast their generational approaches to work and employment and digital in that sense, and again, without making any stereotypical judgments that just because young people have a smartphone means they have all the digital skills they need to get into the workplace.
And this is another one that you touched on towards the end. Are you defining work always as paid employment, or can it be broader than that, such as independent creativity, making, volunteering, mentoring, etc.? All good options for people with mental health conditions.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Emma, why didn't you take a question?
Yeah, happy to give you a little break and you can jump in. I was just going to say that in the challenge brief, we have defined work according to the Office of National Statistics definition of employment, which is paid employment. So the point is the end goal is to support people to get back and to remain in paid employment, but we definitely acknowledge that participation in voluntary activities, mentoring, as outlined in that question, are a gateway towards that. But yes, the end goal is around paid employment.
And just to add, I guess the kind of the grey area there is, I guess, around self-employment, right? And understanding, if somebody is seeking is developing a creative industries kind of, let's put it like this. And I think this is the way the tax office talk about it. If you've got, because they allow you an allowance, if you've got a hobby that you want to transition into a kind of more serious, if you like, or an expanded activity that is your main source of income, then I think that's a really interesting area in terms of, and particularly for creative professionals who are often in self-employment or kind of what's the word, contractual, so they might have pieces of work that come and go for a year at a time. I think we have to understand the pluralistic nature of employment, and again, I wouldn't necessarily want to exclude things that look particularly at those groups, but it's recognizing that we're sort of talking about employment in that sense rather than hobbies, whilst recognizing that developing a autonomy, mastery and purpose of a hobby might be a gateway to employment. Apologies if we were trying to make a meal of this, but it's, we're trying to there are some grey areas here that we're trying to both allow you to come to us with ideas whilst also giving you some guidance.
Thank you. And to give you a break for a moment, Rebecca, so there's a couple of questions in the chat about support available and potentially how to put in contact with partners. So firstly, from a researcher in a university, they don't necessarily have the information about how to easily integrate with the NHS. Is there any support available from SBRI or NHS England to address this?
So I'd probably say your best point of call is, as Helen was saying, to get in touch with your local health innovation network. They're really great at being able to kind of match you up with people working in that same area as you. Also, there's the NHS Innovation Service that can help with some of that matchmaking. Helen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, not really. Thank you. Yeah, I'd say to reach out to your nearest health innovation network, who will obviously have that network of NHS stakeholders within their geography, and be able to look at linking you up with potential adopters, clinical leads, etc., etc. Or the NIS, the National Innovation Service portal, is a good place to start as well if you wanted to do some exploratory work via there. But ultimately, that will probably lead you into a HIN anyway. So yes, I'd probably say reach out to us in the first instance, and we'll see what we can help with.
Thank you. And Helen, again, is it best to contact the HIN for the geography or region that the applicant is placed in or wishes to access?
It is, yes. So, there will be a HIN in your local area. So it's probably best, most sensible to reach out to your nearest HIN. Having said that, we do work very closely together, and we have sort of common areas that we all work around, but we also have specialist areas of expertise as well, depending upon each HIN, and work that we've done historically. So there's nothing to prohibit you reaching out to a different HIN than your nearest one. So it's entirely up to you.
Thank you. And Rebecca, I'll address this to you rather than direct to Helen, as her response might be different. Is support needed from the Health Innovation Network as necessary for the application?
So yeah, from our perspective, it's not a requirement that you're engaged with the Health Innovation Network, but we would strongly advise you to get in touch with them, because they can help on so many aspects of the application, from, as Helen mentioned, helping you to find project partners, as well as providing consultation services on patient and public involvement and other aspects that we're sort of really keen to see that you've got strong plans on. Helen, yeah, I'll pass over to you if you've got anything more to add.
Again, not really. I think it's helpful. We've got a long sort of history and experience of supporting various different competitions, and have a good understanding of what makes a strong application. So we can give general advice and guidance as needed, really. So it's always worth having a conversation with your local HIN.
Thank you. And another one for you, Rebecca, covering a number of people's questions. In terms of the size and scope of this funding opportunity, are you able to give any indication as to the total available pot, whether the funds will be split by the 3 subcategories, so on the quality of applications received, and what are the anticipated number of projects in total for each sub-challenge?
Yeah, so sorry not to be able to probably give you any exact numbers on this, but we will fund based on the quality of the applications and based on available budget at the time that NHS England comes to ratify applications. In terms of sub-challenge area, we'll fund, as I said, the highest quality applications across all of the sub-challenges. I don't think there's any more to add on that.
Thank you. And I know we're rapidly approaching time, so I'll try and get through a couple of more questions before we sum up. Rebecca, again, you mentioned commercialise and route to market in your presentation. Is there an expectation to secure funding or support at the end of the 12 months? Could you elaborate on the expectations at the end of the project?
So there's no, I suppose, defined expectation that you'll have sort of either follow-on funding or investment ready to go at the end of these projects. But obviously, as you mentioned, the sort of aim of our SBRI programs is to de-risk projects to a point, to get them to a point at which they can then get follow-on funding from a wider array of organisations. In terms of your commercialisation, obviously we're keen to see that you have plans in place to commercialize, implement, market your product, because we want to see these innovations getting into the NHS and providing benefit for patients. So that's kind of why there's a key focus on that in terms of the assessment criteria and the application form.
Thank you. And another question for, apologies, is James still on call, or others from NHS England? Does the inequality sub-competition have to cover all of those groups listed, or can it focus on one or two if well justified?
I'll give James a rest on this one, and I'll answer that one. It can be all, or one, or two, or whatever. Yeah, it's any of those.
Thank you. And there's a sort of linked question to that about the presentation, the challenge brief. We're talking about reaching as many people as possible. However, it seems like there's also the suggestion that some interventions, i.e. menopause or fuel poverty, may only serve a small group of people and exclude others. Can we assume that you'll accept innovations that only help some people? And is there any preference around that?
Again, I'll answer this, James, if that's okay. Yeah, I mean, we have no preference. So generalization would be great, but also if you want to target a particular group, as long as you've got evidence to suggest that that would work, then that's fine. But yeah, there's no preference. It can be generalized or it can target a certain group.
If I can just jump in, and again, I think this is where it's so worth doing your homework around the existing market in this space and the difficulties. There's an awful lot written, you know, from various NHS and kind of affiliated organisations like the Wellcome Trust in terms of the research and, you know, what's gone on in this space. There is a report from Mind a few years ago, chaired by Paul Farmer, on workplace, I think commissioned by the government at the time. So lots of homework to do. And I suppose, you know, looking at the, you know, a one size, just being really clear on, you know, generalizability and your kind of evidence base for the impact of generalizability, or a generalized solution versus specific solutions for individual populations. I think there's a tension there between scale and impact. So I'm not going to give you the answer, but I'd love to see that working out, as it were, in when we see those applications coming through.
Thank you. And final question in 30 seconds. If a therapy solution improved someone's mental health to the extent that they looked after their physical pain condition, e.g. musculoskeletal pain, when in employment, leading to lower costs on the NHS for treatment of that pain, would the health economic case for lowering the cost of chronic pain care be a valid evidence line within this competition?
That's tough to say no to, because presumably it's also going to have an impact on, I mean, I guess from a, and this is where it's tricky, isn't it? Because I mean, Catherine presented that we're, you know, from an NHS England point of view, we're interested in both of those groups from a, you know, and both of those are leading causes of, you know, people not being able to access work and not being able to stay in work. So I feel like we can't really say no to that. But at the same time, I suppose the primary focus of this program is on that mental health element. So we want to see at least the mental health value case, if you like, in terms of that, with maybe a secondary outcome on MSK costs, in terms of costs to the NHS around MSK care.
Yeah, I agree with that, James.
Right, well, I just want to say thank you to everyone for listening, and thank you to our wonderful host of speakers and panelists. As mentioned, the competition will launch tomorrow officially, so we've got a lot of information up on our website already, and then from tomorrow the button will go live to actually start your application on the research management system. If you do have any further questions, we'll be holding a Q&A session at the end of October, and the Eventbrite to register is, I believe, now up on the website as well. So you can register for that. If you have any further questions, you can ask them there. And we'll also start with a brief presentation with a bit of hints and tips to support your application. And then if there are any other questions in the meantime, our email address, sbri@lgcgroup.com. And just to say, we will be reviewing all the questions asked today. Apologies if we didn't quite get to yours, but we'll be updating the FAQs on the website with some of those that were asked today. So do take a look there. So last points from me, please do read the challenge brief, do read the guidance for applicants, and really do emphasise in your application how you address the challenge brief and potential impact from your project, as the highest assessment criteria is really how well you align with the challenge brief. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for everyone. Best of luck with your applications, and do get in contact if you have any questions. Thank you.